Thanks everyone for attending my session today instead of how to conduct a meeting. It's very, I feel honored that so many of you chose my session. Today, this is about personal branding. When they called me up and said, Daniel, would you do this? I said, well, I sure would like to come to Toronto. However, I'm not really a personal brand guru. That's more in the domain of social media and people who are professional coaches and that kind of business. However, I thought about it and said, well, I really would like to come to Toronto. So yes, I would be happy to talk to you about personal branding. So as I thought about that and reflected on it a little bit, I thought, well, I spend a great deal of my time helping people in organizations figure out the story they need to tell. And I'll talk a little bit about that work in a few minutes, but I thought, well, there's no reason why the process that I use for those groups can't be applied to our own work and our own identities. So basically, today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through, let's see if I can get this guy to work. There we go. I'm going to take you through the process that we use when we're working to create brands. I'm going to talk a little bit about the agency that I work for and the types of work we do in a second. So today, a few things that I want to do is I want to go over the objectives for the session with you. If you have any other ideas or things that you want to discuss, flag them and I'll try my best to find a clever way to act like I know something about that. I will talk a little bit about me and my work. I'll talk about the work we do at Signals Design Group where I work. I'm going to introduce you to basic concepts of branding because it's important that you understand what a brand is and is not. I'm going to show you why brand is important in the context of health. About 60% of the work we do is in health. So I'm going to show you some examples. I'm going to show you some things from evidence-based literature around branding in health. You will probably all know far more about this than I. But again, it's important to set the context for why branding is important in health. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what a personal brand is. And as we do that, we're going to move into what I hope is the interactive session of this talk this morning, where we're actually going to go through some exercises. And I'm going to talk to you, take you through those, and I'm going to ask you to sort of do them. And then we'll talk a little bit. I want to reserve as much time as possible for talking about what we found through this process and where we might take it as you go forward, sort of building, developing your careers and focusing your practice. So that's today's session. Any comments on that? Does it sound good? Okay, great. Thumbs up. All right, the learning objectives for today. I would like for you to understand branding. Some people cower in fright in the health context when you mention branding or marketing. I understand. But I want you to actually get over that fear and understand why it could be useful. Again, I want to go over branding within the health context. More importantly, though, I would like for you to get something out of this because Lord knows you will be tired of listening to me talk, and I talk enough, so no one really needs more of me talking. So I want you to actually do something today, and that something that you will do is what we call in our work a brand DNA, and that's really a set of ideas and messages that we use to inform any type of communication or work that we're doing. So that's what we're going to do. And then finally, we'll talk about ways in which we can bring our own personal brands to life. I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. Here I am in a boat. So I'm the vice president of Signals Design Group. I'm going to talk about our work in a second. I mostly deal with strategy. It's really all I deal with. So I'm a strategist. When I try to explain what that means, I usually have difficulty, and people usually look at me very confused. Is it advertising? Is it communications? What is it exactly you do? I have a methodology of work. I was trained as a journalist and a documentary filmmaker. I taught for a number of years, which you can see here in the university context. And then somehow I decided that I would move to Canada and throw away my teaching career and start again because I wanted a challenge. In that, I ended up doing a fairly complicated project for the University of British Columbia Faculty of Medicine, which was to develop partnerships and do government relations for the distribution of medical education and health professional training across the province. I did that for a number of years, and then I said, I don't want to do that anymore. Please, please, let me do something else. And so at that point, I decided that I needed to return to doing creative work, and I moved into working with Signals, who I had been working with for many years. So that's a little bit about my odd journey to the place that I occupy today. I do like baseball and records. That's mostly what I've been doing as I've been in the few hours of downtime I've had here in Toronto has involved watching baseball on my laptop and looking at record stores. So don't do that. Don't do that. No. Let me see if I can figure out what has happened. I have to keep touching it, don't I? Okay, let's go back. Skipped all the good stuff. Signals has been around for about 35 years. It was started by a designer who did very technical, very high-end design in the 80s, and he did very ostentatious corporate type stuff. It was really, I meet old people from time to time and say, boy, it was really something back in the day if you had a Signals annual report, and I kind of, we do so much more. And so he married a woman who was a health communicator by training. She worked on the Clinical Trials Network in the early days of HIV and AIDS in Canada. She had a very academic practice. They got married, and that's sort of the genesis of the crazy thing we have today, which is a very skilled firm of interdisciplinary folks. So we have strategists, designers, developers, people who work in PR, people who work in marketing. We're fully integrated, very team-based on the things that we do. We're very academic and critical by nature, so we tend to work on very complicated things. Like I said, about 50 to 60% of that work is in health, but we also work outside of health, and it's usually where people have complicated subject matter, complicated audiences, or they have complicated partnerships and institutions. We tend to go into those places and help them make sense of what it is they're doing and communicate that. Let's see, keep going. You can't really see this because it's crazy, but I was giving a talk to the Mental Health Affinity Group a few weeks ago, and someone asked, well, have you worked with anyone in health? And I was like, yeah, I have worked with just about everyone in health. So our work spans very local, national, and international clients. We've worked on the international side. We do a lot of work with Open Society Foundations. We've worked with UN AIDS. We worked with Universities Allied for Essential Medicines. We've done work with CAMH here in Toronto, lots of folks. So, and then back home in Vancouver, we've worked with just about everyone you can imagine. So all health authorities, research institutes, faculty of medicine, Children's Hospital, all kinds of folks. We do all kinds of things. I'm going to show you just a few examples of things we've done lately that I somehow think, boy, how did we manage to do this? And that really refers to the series of animated penises from famous historical people through time who had syphilis. This was a syphilis campaign that we did for BCCDC. And when I went to meet them for the very first meeting, they said, oh, the guy's here to talk about rub the cock. And I said, what? No, I'm not here to talk about that. Who are you talking about? They had used some light-sensitive ink on a postcard for a measles outbreak, and it was a big hit. They got a lot of media attention for it, so they had found out that there was actually some ink that if you rubbed would change color. So they had this idea that they were going to do the syphilis campaign that would use that. And I thought, well, I have a better idea. It's called dictators. And then that led us down the path of this. And then obviously, as we were doing the dictators idea, we realized that we were actually stigmatizing and shaming people. We thought, we can't do that. That's a terrible idea. So it ended up being Sif history, and it's a pretty funny thing. It got covered in Vice and lots of places, so you may have seen it. I have put it up here because I like to work on health issues that are really on the margins. That's where I like to work specifically. So that means sexual health. I like to spend a lot of time in substance use, and I like to work on mental health. Those are key areas of my practice, as well as sort of screening and promotion campaigns. I like to do that work. Here you'll see a campaign we spent last summer working on with Fraser Health, which is around the fentanyl overdose crisis. I would just like to say one quick thing. I don't have a lot of time in this preamble, but this campaign we thought was really radical in the sense that it repositioned opioid addiction within the context of a suburban home and with people who would look like your mom and dad, because that's actually people who were dying. And so we were actually quite proud of this work. We felt like it was really effective in trying to change the narrative around who a substance user is and who's at risk. And again, a lot of positive feedback around this campaign. Another piece of work which we just launched is cancer screening for the First Nations Health Authority. So this is another area of our practice and my particular practice that I quite am proud of and like to do focus on. So we do a lot of work with the First Nations Health Authority. This thing just launched a couple of weeks ago. And then these are mostly ad campaigns. We do more than this, of course. But the other item here is PharmaCare 2020, which we worked with Steve Morgan from UBC on for a number of years to basically promote policy change around pharmacare in Canada, and that was fairly effective leading up to the last election. So again, a lot of evidence that goes in, a lot of research that goes into our work, and then again, we're trying to find clever, creative ways to actually reframe those issues to create something that's going to break through the noise or clutter of our sort of communication ecosystems, and something that we think will be effective, because the last thing we want to do in our health work is make the same old boring kind of health work that you see far too much of and we think is totally ineffective. Okay, so I'm going to race through this part and then we're going to do some work. Anybody know what a brand is? No. It was a great look back there. It was like, I do not know what it is. Anybody want to take a guess at what a brand is? Bold. Lively group. All right. Well, let's talk about what it isn't. A lot of people think when you say the word brand that it's a logo. Okay, it's the logo. Put the logo somewhere. It's not. A lot of people think that it is a sort of visual identity system. It's not. A lot of people think that maybe it's a product. It's none of those things. This is a quote by a guy who wrote a little tiny book that I've loved for many years called The Brand Gap. And it's an effective book because it says, it was really early in the 90s when he said, a brand is not what you say it is, it's what they say it is. And that means that we can go out here broadcasting our message about who we are, but really how brand is built is through experience. And it's what you experience every time you encounter that product or that service and what that does for you. And so really, as much as institutions or corporations try to control their brand is really mediated by people who use it every day, right? And we learn this cruelly with the sort of rise in social media, right? Where users can actually really take down people if they try to say things that aren't true and don't reflect the real experience. So really, brand is about reputation, and how is reputation built? It's built through a consistent experience, right? Typically one that we think is positive. What is a brand? Again, it's about a gut feeling. It's about that experience you have. It can be all of those things that surround the communication, the imaging, the advertising, the videos, how a space feels, what it allows you to do. What comes to mind when you experience it? What are the feelings or the emotions you associate with that experience? Again, it's also about a promise. It's about building trust between you and your target audience, right? How do we build trust? We're going to talk a little bit about that. And again, all those logos and taglines and all the wonderful work that those sick people in advertising do is also a part at trying to establish that story. But again, that story is only as good as the experience that you have when you're using that product or being in that space. Now, quickly, I want to just talk a little bit about what the mechanics of a brand are. So in the marketing world, a brand needs to establish an idea. What's the idea? What's the big idea that we're working towards, right? Nike, Just Do It, Axe body spray that I think is really funny, irresistible attraction. Campbell's, this idea of comfort food. So a lot of times brands begin by trying to figure out what's this big idea that our work is about, okay? They may never say this to the public, but this is the idea that is going to help them organize all of their effort, right? Once they do that, they like to sort of stake out a market position. What's our position? Are we the cheapest? Are we the fastest? Are we the most efficient? Usually it's features and benefits and that type of stuff, right? And then once they do that, once they have that single idea, once they understand their position, they're typically trying to always drive that idea home, right? They're trying to find one big idea that they focus on that's relevant between their goals and their consumer or audience goals, and they're trying to constantly deliver that, right? So focus, understanding your market, and then repeated actions that do not sway from that goal, okay? So let's keep that in mind. Right now, if I asked you, this is your first challenge. If I ask you right now at the start of this talk, what is your brand idea? In 3 words or less, what would you say? Take a minute to write this down. So if you tried to come up with what's the big idea motivating your work? Is it the subject area you work on, the impact or change you want to create? Is it how you work? So take a minute and just in the simplest, least amount of words, write down what you think what your brand idea is about. Anybody need paper? Oh, yes. There you go. There's paper. Anyone else? It's free. Just kidding, I'm going to charge you for it. Again, simple, don't overthink this. Just try to get down a simple idea that you think is core to your work. Okay. If you need to keep thinking about it, that's okay. I'm going to keep talking because I want to get to the fun stuff. What is a health brand? Oh, good Lord. If you knew how many times I was called to talk to boards and researchers and physicians and to have to explain to them what a brand is and then have all of these old white dudes look at me like I'm crazy. It's really sad. But I do this because I know at the end of the day we'll make something better. And so I have spent a lot of time trying to articulate the value of branding within the context of health, why it may be important to their project, and ultimately how it may help us move the dial with the target audience. And this is really why we would do this. It's about efficiency and effectiveness of messaging and action, right? That's what a brand helps you do. It helps you organize and focus your work. Here in the health context, did I go too far? No, I did not. There's a lot of evidence-based research around, well, I shouldn't say a lot, you will know more than me, but I do this from time to time, what I call the lo-fi literature review, because often I need evidence-based cases when I'm sort of making the case for the folks I'm working with. So I need them to understand that this is not a wild idea in health, that it actually has a precedent, and there's actually research around the effectiveness of branding within health. There are a few articles and things that come to mind. There's a guy named W.D. Evans who did a systematic review that I tend to refer to quite a lot. But again, in healthcare, this isn't a crazy idea, but branding is an emotional connection between the practice and the people it serves. More importantly, and this comes from W.D. Evans' work, brands shape consumer perceptions in the public health arena and can encourage adoption of healthy behaviors. So again, there's a lot of research around this, and in this particular review, there's a lot of time looking at things like tobacco ads and other work. So there is a precedent in the research for why you would think about marketing and branding in the context of health promotion. Here are a couple of ideas specifically from health branding. The first two really are about the universals of branding, but secondly, public health brands are the associations that individuals hold for health behaviors or lifestyles that embody multiple health behaviors. Branded health messages typically are evidence-based, and there's a body of evidence on their behavior change effectiveness, especially in nutrition, tobacco control, and HIV and AIDS. And this would be one of the significant differentiators for my work in health versus when I'm working with the port or some other place, that a lot of times when we're working on health messaging, it is coming exactly from evidence-based research, right? So this is one sort of slight differentiator when you're working with health. How do we take that research knowledge and translate it, not just in the KT way, but how do we make it plain language? How do we make it understood? Do we use a nudge concept to change a behavior? How are we actually going to take that work and turn it into something relevant for everyday people or practitioners or even policymakers, which is a lot of the work we tend to do. When do you need a health brand? I thought this might be useful for you as people who are getting grants and doing work and trying to publish and take your research to new places. We tend to get called a lot of times from folks like yourself saying, we've got a grant, we want to promote this new change, behavior change to a patient population. Can you help us? And I say, sure. And then they say, well, we only have 30 grand. And I say, oh, come on. So when do you need a brand? Okay, so basically 3 big areas that we like to think about. When you need to change a behavior in the public population, a brand can help. When you need to change a practice in a health professional population, a brand can help. When you want to change a policy, a brand can help. Now, those 3 things tend to reside within the constellation of a campaign. But again, a brand helps you solidify that message and that sort of big idea that we want to drive everyone towards. The campaign is a way to activate that message, right? To bring it to the people who need it. So those are 3 common areas where we tend to do work in healthcare. But then there's also things like launching a new service, program, or project. You need to communicate how you're going to do that, what's going to be different. Maybe you need to recruit people. Maybe you need to recruit patients to participate in research. Maybe you need to recruit other researchers into your teams. Maybe you want to recruit top talent to your center. Any number of things like that fall out of recruiting can be helpful. And then finally, some of you may be turning innovations into new products and tools and things like that, and looking to privatize, to create your own companies and sort of launch those projects. So you might be seeking investors, and in the context of that, you need a very consistent, clear message around what it is your tool or device is going to do. So those are some of the reasons why you might need a brand when you're working within health. I want to talk very quickly about a project we did, and I thought I picked one that is youth focused because you are all working in some way, shape, or form with youth. Anybody in here working on mental health or mental health service design? All right, hurrah. 3 of us. Okay, so this is a project that I worked on from start to finish. So this is basically in British Columbia a series of what we call integrated youth wellness service centers. So this is using an idea based around integrating services into one spot. It uses a stepped care model, which I will not try to explain, but basically trying to understand where within the system of care we can intervene most effectively and most inexpensively, as well as being from upstream all the way through to very acute types of care. Foundry grew out of a project within St. Paul's, which was called the Inner City Youth Program. And that program was actually focused around marginalized youth within the downtown core who had a lot of psychiatric or substance use needs and who were only being served by the emergency room. As you can imagine, this was incredibly ineffective and expensive. And furthermore, they found in doing this work that even if they were able to take care of their immediate needs within the context of emergency care, that they were discharging them to no homes, no jobs, no single place to point them to get things like EI or help. And so they realized very quickly that we are failing if all we're doing is cycling people in and out of the emergency room and not addressing the social determinants of health. So the first step towards that was creating a center on Granville Street that grew out of the hospital and became the Granville Youth Health Center. And that center and the whole project that we did with them, we actually engaged youth in the design of the brand and of the website and of the center itself. And this was sort of like an aha moment for a lot of folks within the Vancouver world because they were able to come into the space and it was truly different. It looked and felt different. There's a cage in the back for when you come in with your pet rat. You can put your pet rat in the cage and get the care you need. There's a kitchen. They teach people how to cook and prepare food. There's a person who teaches them how to balance a checkbook, how to open a checking account. In that space, you can get access to housing. You can get access to employment or education. So no longer do you get bounced around from door to door, which typically tends to shut right as you arrive at the doorstep. Instead, it's all within one space. Foundry grew out of that idea. I worked with a team of folks throughout the summer to put together the proposal that would go to government to create the first 5 centers. We somehow managed to be successful in that. And then basically what we did is we had a challenge, which was how do we consult with the communities, all the people that are going to be involved? How would we co-create this brand in this space with youth and those who are going to use it? And then how would we sort of make something to tell that story and represent it in such a way that youth would feel comfortable coming to this space. So it was quite a tall challenge. In order to do that, our process, we always begin with research and engagement. So we did a significant amount of landscape research that involved looking at literature, that involved looking at sort of what we would call, again, a lo-fi ethnographic study of youth and youth culture and youth habits. And this was helpful for us because we needed people, executives, older folks, to understand what is a youth's life really about at this point in time. We needed to understand the context around youth and what they like to do, where they like to go, where they like to hang out, what they like to talk about. So we did that work, and then we ran a series of engagement sessions, what we call discovery sessions, and we did those across BC. Oh, come on. Just getting cooked up here. We did those across BC. We had folks with lived experience in the room, so families, youth. We had all types of health service providers in those rooms. This model also works under the guise or idea of collective impact. So a number of communities had to have key sponsors. So people like the John Howard Society, the Y, Canadian Mental Health Association. Each one of those big brands and organizations is the key leading sponsor within their community, but they had to step away from their brand to come into this to be part of this movement. So that was also very interesting. We did those sessions across BC. We did Indigenous youth sessions. We did sessions with youth, with families. We did them all together. Then I went across Canada doing them because at the time there was a hope that we could create a national model for this. So I went to places like Manitoba and here in Toronto, and then to New Brunswick and to a First Nations reserve in Eskasoni in New Brunswick. So it was fascinating. We also ran market research with youth and families around what were their needs, what were their attitudes towards mental health. A lot of work. We did all that, and then we ran a series of sessions with youth. That's the brand. We ran a series of design charrettes with youth. So a design charrette is a really fun process where we brought multiple people into a big hall like this one, and we had them do a series of exercises together. So youth were working with nurses and with folks from family practice and researchers, and everyone were working together to actually design a service and a model and a center. So if we were coming to this space, what would we want to do in this space? And how would this space need to make us feel? And how would we want to access services? So this is sort of the fun part where you start to apply some of these concepts towards a service design and a center design. So we did that all with youth, all with families. Everybody who was going to be a user in the space participated. We turned that into a series of things. We always begin our process first in language and messaging. You can't really see anything here. But again, the first start of building a brand for us is after we get through our research and engagement, we now start to draft out these sort of key concepts. For our work and what we'll do today, there's a few components of this. It's the sort of brand promise or brand idea. It's the value proposition. It's the key attributes of the brand. It is the key messages, what we call a brand story, that sort of help you deliver that idea of what it is you're doing. And then finally, it's the reasons to believe. Those are the proof points. So these are more the sort of database pieces. So we want to capture and pull all that together. And this is really a tool to help us gain internal understanding, because one of the biggest challenges of a brand is not just how are we going to make it relevant for the audience we want to reach externally, but how are we going to make it relevant internally? How are we all going to adopt these ideas? How is it going to inform our practice? How will we, in essence, live the brand? So part of this process was political and was aimed at gaining that sort of internal cohesion. If we just made a brand and a name and threw it out there, everyone would have rejected it and been very pissed off and said, how dare you, I want my own brand. And we knew we couldn't let that happen. So the way that we did it was by asking people to come into the space with us and build it together. And I find through my practice, both in the old jobs that I have done and in this one, that is enormously beneficial, right? Having people participate helps you build the adoption, right? And I honestly believe beyond the political, we get better ideas. We build better things because we are getting real insights from the people who are closest to the issue or the problem. And that's what I think we should always be doing. I know that this will sound crazy, but to those of you here who are doing research, you know, we want to make sure that we are learning from the right people and that we are actually making things that are going to help those people. I'm very much a stickler for that. After we got through the branding and messaging, we did do the visual identity. This identity is a little washed out here today, but again, you can see the tagline, where wellness takes shape, the name, Foundry. Again, we went through a very significant naming process. Everything we did on this project was sent to a youth advisory, so we were constantly getting youth feedback on it outside of their participation in the actual activities that led us to this place. So again, we created the visual identity. We used the design charrettes as a way to seek input and start to build out a design for the centers themselves. They're each a little bit different, but again, they have a common look and feel. They bring the brand and the brand story into the space. And actually what we're trying to do through the project, like create spaces where youth can sort of use the space in a number of ways, that came through the design charrette process and actually is very much real when you visit the spaces. They don't look like anything else I've really seen in North America in terms of youth health. They're pretty fascinating. There are even things like iPads when you come in so that you don't have to tell your story to a person. If you feel more comfortable putting your details into an iPad, then the physician gets the notes, and it helps people if they're there for things that they might not feel comfortable talking about with others, because when you're a young person, that's real, very real. Again, there's also really cool things inside the spaces like kitchens and stuff like that, which help people gain new life skills, which is pretty cool. One thing I'll say about Foundry is that for us, it's been a pretty incredible project to be a part of. It's a game changer in Canada. It draws inspiration from projects in Australia and Ireland, but it is the first of its kind here in North America to some degree. And it's been really great to be a part of. It's led us to do work. We had talks with Stanford for quite some time about a project, the first one that they want to do in the US. And then there's also work here in Ontario with the Youth Wellness Hubs project, which I was just meeting about earlier this week. And then there's also work that we've done out of this called Frame, for any of you who are a part of mental health, youth mental health work. It's a national network of excellence. So I encourage you to go look up Frame. It's F-R-A-Y-M-E, and they're doing a lot of great work in terms of knowledge mobilization. So anyhow, we also built the website. So we did everything for this. The one last thing I want to say about Foundry is that there was a developmental evaluator embedded in this project from start to finish. And they just wrapped up a sort of 2-year study of the first 2 years. It was very fascinating because all of the findings, when they sort of qualitative work they did around people's beliefs and experience within the space and what they were working towards, mapped exactly to the brand messaging. So we felt like something was working, meaning that the messaging and the ideas that we developed at the outset of the project seemed to be true to people 2 years in, that was the language people were using, those were the ideas that they were sort of celebrating and embracing. Furthermore, when they did a round for the second round of centers, people made their own t-shirts with the brand. For me, that made me happy because it was resonating with people, and in their application process, they were making videos and pictures, and they were taking it, and they were already starting to see how their story could be a part of that larger story. And when you do that with a brand, you've done something pretty great. So again, we only play a minor role in that because I do believe it ultimately comes down to the enormous talents of the people leading that work. So here's where it gets fun. So what from all of this can we use to help us understand our own sort of personal brand and our own story? So this is what I want to spend the remainder of our time doing this morning. So I joked about the fact that I'm not really a personal coach type person. I've had to overcome my cynicism about such things. And so I find it very funny to be talking about personal branding, but I'm going to do it anyhow. Because it is true. This was a guy, Tom Peters, who many years ago was a bit ahead of the curve. And he was already summing up that he was already predicting where we were going. I think he wrote this book in the 90s. But, you know, we were starting to evolve beyond the idea of brands as sort of language around products. And really, brands were language around cultures and experiences. And big companies knew that and were moving to that space. And so Tom Peters was very wise in saying that as individuals, we can also seize on this. We can also start to define our own story and tell our own story and move beyond just our role within an organization to become something a little bit larger. And we need to start thinking about that. He was pretty prescient. There's a great article in Science Magazine by a guy named Jeffrey McDonald, which I think sums up really all of my beliefs about branding and why you do it and why people are ultimately successful in life. He talks a little bit about his experience as a researcher for a number of years. Tried a lot of different things, sort of was doing a lot of things without focus, was doing a lot of research and work, and then finally one day he stepped back and said, what am I actually doing, right? Where should I be focusing my energy? I need to be saying no to a lot of things in order to say yes to the right things. And if I do that, if I do that with consistency and with a strategy, I can be known for this work. I can actually become an expert in my field. I can develop a practice that's my own. And this will help me be known. This will help me advance my work. It's a pretty great article. Here, you know, he talks about a research brand identity is your central mission. And this is something very dear to my heart. We're going to talk about it. But it also helps you make it clear to others how they should define you, and you help them remember who you are and what you do. So I think this is a great thing. I would recommend you all go read it. It's just a short little piece, but it's a nice piece, and I think it summarizes a lot of the key issues. When do you need a personal brand? Dark night of the soul, existential crisis. I'm going to talk about mine in a second. When your grandparents ask what it is you do, always a difficult question to answer. You may also need a personal brand when you are thinking about applying for jobs, writing a resume, tailoring your CV. Many of you, I had a great beer with some folks last night after the wonderful session or dinner, and we talked a little bit about the challenges of how they were making their own personal websites. And I sort of said, well, I'll help you tomorrow. I'll help you. So you may need to think about this. Also, you know all too well that you have to apply for things. Funding, grants, articulating your value, what it is you're doing, very useful within that context. And then finally, some of you may be brave enough to use social media. Not me, not going to do that. However, I encourage those of you to embrace that if you so desire. I was trying to think of how, yes. Oh, why not? I'm just joking. It was one of my bad jokes. We'll talk about it towards the end when we get to the activation portion of this event. I'm speaking purely from my own personal philosophies. I did use it, now I don't. I believe you can be more. This is my attempt at being your life coach. As you can see, I rendered it with real aplomb. But I do believe a couple of things. I believe that brands, institutions, philanthropic organizations, researchers, me, anyone else, we get better by focusing our energy. I am not a believer in spray and pray approaches. I am very much opposed to that. I like to pick out an objective. I like to focus my work around that objective. And I don't stop until we improve or meet that objective. So I believe focus is the key to work. I believe it's the key to athletes. I believe it's the key to research. I believe it's the key to anything we want to do on. That we get good by focusing on something. We pick an idea and we go at it very hard. If we do that, we will naturally become experts. You can become an expert in anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be the domain of your research. You can be an expert in collaboration. But this idea of becoming an expert, becoming a thought leader is very important. In going through this process, you're also setting goals. You're trying to understand where it is you want to get, where you want to end up. What's going to get you there? What won't get you there? Because the things that won't get you there are the things, unfortunately, you have to say no to. And saying no is a big part of this. You need to make choices, and we need to inform those choices. If you do this work, opportunities will begin, you'll begin to see opportunities, and you should seize those opportunities to advance yourself. And we're going to talk about that. Ultimately, though, I believe that through focus, through developing expertise, through seizing opportunities, we actually have an opportunity to make a difference. And I believe at this point in time in our society that we have a lot of systems and a lot of problems that need to be addressed. And we need to think very hard about how we're going to do that, because the old methods may not always apply. So it's going to take rooms of people like yourself, as well as lots of other people out there working together within this sort of focus area to actually make a system change. Now, quickly, me, my dark night of the soul moment. I taught for many years. I was trained as a journalist and a creative writer, and I taught those things. I very much have been, I guess, story has been essential to my life since I was a very young child. I had a very wonderful grandmother who would always tell me stories of her life growing up. It was my favorite thing to do, was to listen to my grandmother. And then through that, I read like every book I could possibly find as a kid. I was a total book nerd. And then I worked on the newspaper. When I was in high school, I was the editor of the newspaper. And so writing and story has always been a part of what I did. And then when I went to college, I was like, of course, I'll become a journalist. And then I was like, yeah, maybe not. Maybe I'll be a documentary filmmaker. And I did that for a while. And then I thought, you know, I really like writing stories that aren't always true. Maybe I'll go do that. And I did it. When I ended up, though, doing my government relations work, I sort of felt like, what am I doing here? What in the world have I done? I went from being a teacher, I went from being someone who was really focused on the craft of story and was living that to a place where I didn't really know what I was doing anymore, why I was doing it. I felt very disconnected from my work and what I thought I should be doing. It was very much like the woman's talk last night around gratitude. This happens to us in our careers from time to time. We get burned out. We get the feeling like we're not really doing things that we believe we should be doing, or the things that are actually using our real skill set. So what do you do in that case? For me, the thing that woke me up and got me out of my slumber was my good friend Jim Foley, who was I went to graduate school with Jim, one of my good friends. And after graduate school, he decided that he was going to ditch creative writing. He went and did a journalism degree, and then almost immediately was embedded with troops in Afghanistan. He was reporting as a freelance journalist, as an embedded freelance journalist from Afghanistan during the conflict. He did a piece called A Firefight in Kandahar Valley, which was one of the sort of pieces, I don't know, maybe a couple of months in, where he was embedded, he's riding in a tank, and they actually get ambushed. And a guy loses his arm, the guy's driving the truck, loses his arm in the fight. He's filming it the whole time. One guy gets hit in the head with a bullet, but he's got his helmet on, but he's suffering from a traumatic sort of concussion injury. And, geez. Anyway, I saw Jim's story and I thought, what am I doing, right? Jim's out here risking his life, making these incredible stories for no money. He was really, really making no money at that time, enormous risk. And I thought, well, if Jim's doing this, I need to find a way to get back to doing this. So there were a number of things I did following that. I went back, I decided that I needed some help. So I took the advice of a colleague and I actually worked with a coach. I overcame my cynicism and my severe sort of hesitancy to do that, and it was very helpful. That coach really just talked to me and tried to understand what it was I wanted to do, and helped me sort of understand what my skill set was, and then gave me ideas for how I might actually apply that skill set within my current practice to get back to doing the things that I wanted to do. I did take that advice, and it was effective. I also realized that I needed to go do some more training, so I went back to school and I did some more work around filmmaking. And then the other thing she said is that, you know, you need to be a bit more opportunistic. When people sort of, you need to get engaged with people. You need to participate. You need to join boards or things and get involved. And so I did that. Again, stuff I didn't really want to do. I'm not a joiner, if you can't tell. So I did that. And again, opportunities started to arise. So really, it got me out of my bubble. It got me out of my sort of trapped negative thinking. And it caused me to engage with more people. And through that, opportunities did come my way. And through that, I was able to focus and focus on what it is I'm good at. So in doing that, you can't really see this today, but really story is central to what I do. When I talk to groups, I'm always talking about story. When I'm working on projects, I'm always doing that through the context of story. And again, I get asked to talk about storytelling from time to time, and I seize those opportunities. So again, I crafted a sort of value proposition for myself. I put it on LinkedIn, and then we're going to talk about how to do that. So I have applied some of these techniques to myself. Even though I joke about personal branding and how I feel about it, I have actually followed many of these steps, and I have actually found that it was very useful for me. And I think it might be very useful for you. Okay, here's the fun part. We have 45 minutes. We're going to use every one of those minutes, okay? So how might we do this morning? Okay, you've heard me talk a little bit about this notion of focus. For me, in anything I work on, I have sort of three key things that I'm thinking about. First of all is that I like to understand the intent of our work, right? I want to understand our purpose, and I want to make sure that our collective efforts are focused on that purpose. If we do that, the second thing we need to do is create coherence. That means that we make very logical connections and we create a consistent experience around our work. And then finally, through establishing an intent, creating coherent and consistent experiences based around that goal, we ultimately can create some kind of change and hopefully greater impact. So this is why I'm not a fan of the spray and pray technique. I'm much more focused and consistent. So today, how do we build a personal brand for ourselves? First of all, we need to understand our audience. The second thing that we'll be doing today is looking at a value proposition, because I think this is one of the key things that if you get nothing more out of today's talk, coming away with at least the bare mechanics of a value proposition for yourself, I think is valuable. We're going to talk a little bit about your personal brand attributes, and we're going to talk a little bit about your reasons to believe. Those are the key things that we want to do today. And then finally, I want to save some time for talking about how we might bring it to life to answer your question about social media. Okay, sound good? Great, here we go. I had a Kendrick Lamar quote, but you know, I'm trying. It's a great song that actually, in many ways, is a brand DNA, because he talks about all the things that make his character, that make him successful. And again, this is exactly what we want to talk about this morning. So first thing we're going to do is an exercise I learned in a course at Stanford. This is the basics of human-centered design, which is the methodology and the approach that I use on any project, any and every project. So the first thing we're going to do today is we're going to try to understand our audience, okay? So here's your first challenge. I want you to get in your mind a real person who represents the audience you most want to engage. So is it a funding agency? Is it the director at your center? Is it a sort of key person in your field? Think about a real person you would want to have a relationship with, a professional relationship. Professional relationship. Think about someone you would want to engage with, that you would want to recognize your work, that you would want to work together with, okay? Can you get that real person in your head? Got it? Everybody got that person? Okay, so you have to think about that person or that agency. Okay, here's the first step. When that person encounters you, what would you want them to think? What would you want that person to think about you and your work? Okay, now I know that you're all type A medical researcher, clinician types, but this is about as many ideas, not a perfect one, okay? So just jot down as many rough ideas as you can get. For your target audience, when they meet you, when they see your work, what would you want them to think? Now, thinking is cerebral, right? This is where we worry, we organize, we classify, we categorize, right? So thinking, the thinking part of our being. What would you want that person to think? I'll tell you a funny story about this. You've now basically gone through step number one of creating what we would call a user persona. When we do this exercise, typically with clients and projects, we do it, it's a two-part process. We ask, what are you currently thinking, feeling, and doing around an issue? And then we flip it and say, what would we, in a perfect world, what would we want people to think, feel, and do? It helps us map barriers and opportunities, right? It helps us understand what are the things going on in our end users' lives where we may be able to intervene. And so this is sort of a good step. This is how you build a persona. I know that you have much more rigorous methods around your work, but I find this has been enormously beneficial for our work as well as our clients when they actually go through the process. The one other thing I want to point out about this is that a lot of this work was designed by Tom and David Kelly, who were Stanford grads who created a company called IDEO. And when I was in talks with Stanford about doing the Integrated Youth Mental Health Project there, We went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And you know, we really wanted to do it. We're trying to make it work. It was a challenge because of locations and things like that. And finally, the woman there called me up and said, Daniel, I'm sorry to tell you, but we went with another group. And I was like, okay, it's okay. But please tell me that you didn't go with some lame group, you know. So I asked, well, who are you going to go with? Well, I don't know. I'm not sure if you've heard of them, but they're local. And I'm like, okay, well, who is it? She said, it's IDEO. And I said, well, you know, if we have to lose, we're losing to the world leaders in human-centered design, who I basically learned what I do from. So I'm okay with that. It's cool. If you want to learn more about human-centered design, IDEO has a toolkit you can download for free. It's called the Human-Centered Design Toolkit. I think they changed the name of it to Field Guide. I highly recommend it. A lot of these practices and processes that they teach you there can be applied to all sorts of scenarios. So it's a good thing. Okay, so now what you've done is you've now, today, decided of a focused target audience for you and your work. You've thought about what you want them to think, you've thought about the emotional response you would want to have, and you've thought about conversions. What are the things I can actually try, or goals I can set in order to get actions and things happening? Now, congratulations, step number one. Now, I want to take a few minutes to think about something else. We do an exercise with people in branding where we do brand success and brand fail. And what I ask in that, it usually helps us understand the attributes or characteristics of a brand, which are typically a set of adjectives that sort of are the key ideas around your work, or attributes around your work. So in order for us to do this today, I want to take a few minutes to try to figure out what would be our personal brand attributes. I think it best to think of it this way. When you or your work succeeds, why? What are the qualities or characteristics of your work when you succeed? Is it because you were collaborative? Is it because your work is credible, trustworthy? Is it because you're innovative? What is it? So again, reflect on real successes you've had. Small, large, medium-sized successes. Those are cool. Think about when you've succeeded at anything. Could be softball. Could be coloring. What tends to define your success? What are the characteristics or attributes? We've thought about our target. We've picked a target audience. We've thought about some goals and things for how we want that target audience to think, feel, and what we want them to do with us. We've now reflected a little bit on the qualities of our personal brand, our attributes. What are those sort of adjectives that we really think best describe our work, that we would want that person or that organization to see in all that we do? Now, this one should be a little easier for you. We're going to get to the hard thing after this. So if you've thought a little bit about those adjectives, right, that sort of define collaborative, innovative, trustworthy, credible, whatever those terms are you came up with for your attributes. Now, let's put down a few proof points. Now, this should be easy for you. Reasons to believe in the brand world are things like the highest EPA estimated fuel economy ratings of any full-size gasoline-powered pickup truck on the market. It's that kind of stuff, right? It's actually those kinds of awards, the real sort of evidence or things around products, right? So in brands, it's all that kind of stuff. But I thought, hey, it might be easier if we take a look at what it might be for health folks. So compliance with existing regulations, third-party endorsements, historical validation, or claims of technical superiority. So again, think about your work. Think about your proof points. Let's list a few, right? What would be the proof for you? Some of you may just be starting out. So it may be things like, you know, your degrees, who you study with, whatever. Some of you may be mid-career and have a whole wonderful list of accomplishments here. But if you were to think about the proof for you, what proves your ability? What is the proof behind your personal brand? we're going to do this one relatively quickly because I want to get to the most difficult one, and I want to have time to talk. I mean, all of you can at least have one, which is CCHCSP something. I talked about that last night, but yes, could use a little help on the name. Tulips, however, beautifully done. Okay, so hopefully you got some proof points, at least you're thinking about them. Those you can probably spend a lot of time, you can probably get quickly as you reflect. Now here is the thing that I care the most about. It's the value proposition, okay? I believe that every project you undertake needs this. I know some KT plans and things actually have this embedded in it, I've seen, that you actually sort of have to have a value proposition around the work. But again, any project I work on, I'm trying to get to what is the value proposition for this. You would be surprised at the level of folks within health who, when you ask, what's the value proposition? They say, I don't know. So I like to remove that doubt, and I like to focus on it. There's an easy way of doing this. Now, for today's purposes, I don't expect you to write this beautiful statement, okay? That'll take some time and some refinement. I want a very crude statement that really answers this template. Now, every time we work on something, we start here. We refine and refine and refine until we get it to be a bit sexier. But we start with this, and it's very crude. This comes from the work of a guy named Jeff Moore. He has a book called Crossing the Chasm, but this is his template, and I use it all the time. Okay, so literally write this out on your page. 4, who's your target audience? Who is your work focused on, right? Are you focused on creating change within the healthcare system? Are you focused on a certain type of patient population? Like, where is your work focused, okay? So get that 4, that group that you're focused on, okay? Who, what do they need? What does that group you're focused on, what do they need? What do they need different in their lives? Okay, so this is the statement of need. So for your audience, who needs X? Our or your, whatever it is, so this would be your research or whatever it is you're doing, okay? What's your product? What's your service? What's your research area? You may need this product category, you may not. We can talk about that. But more importantly is, what is the benefit of your work towards this audience and their need? Right? What's the impact you want to make through your work? So for youth who need a different way of accessing mental health care, Foundry is an integrated youth wellness center that provides a single point of access. Give you an example. Here's one bad example. For non-technical marketers who struggle to find return on investments in social media, our product is a web-based analytics software that translates engagement metrics into actionable revenue metrics. I use this because it's lousy, but it's what I'm hoping you'll do, is just start to get down the basics of it. Here's what we did for Foundry. For young people looking to improve their health and wellness, Foundry offers connection, care, and resources for all of life's challenges. Designed with and for young people, Foundry provides a single door to access someone to talk to, care providers for any health need, and friendly experts that can help them and their families navigate social services, resources, and programs. From a simple snack to sharing difficult conversations with someone you can trust, Foundry provides young people safe, non-judgmental care, information and resources, social services, and other essentials for healthy living. Again, it's a bit long, but I'm trying to capture all those many things in there. This is more of a sort of elevator pitch type thing, but it emerges from the practice of creating the value proposition. So take a minute or two, come back to this value proposition. There's one other framework, if this one is not working for you, which I thought might apply within the context of health research and the things that you're working on. And this one's a little bit different, but only because it's just a different way of ordering the information. So in this model, we start with the enormity of the problem you're tackling, right? So folks I met with last night were working on vaccines, and they were talking about the difficulty in trying to get the public to understand the value of vaccines versus all of the sort of scare around vaccines. So again, you know, that might be an example of the enormity of the problem. So this is a slightly different model. Use the one that you feel works best. So let's spend another minute or two crafting that value proposition. Come back, because I like this one best. I think it's easiest.
Do people use that phrase in economic terms as well? I encounter it in different contexts.
Yeah.
Seemingly thrown around because it sounds sexy.
Value proposition? Yeah. In the economic terms, like in the for-profit brand world, like in the market space, this would be the value of your product as opposed to another, right? So in other words, a value proposition helps you establish, we are this type of product. We are unlike our competitors because of X, and when you use our product, you will get Y, right? And you will see this applied pretty much consistently on any site that's trying to sell you something. They're trying to do this right up at the front, right? In investor decks, investor relations, people are trying to get funding for a new startup or something like that. This is incredibly important, right? So it does come from that universe, but I think we always need to be saying to people what it is we do, why we do it, and why we do it differently, and what it means when we do it. So if we can get that into the most succinct, nice sentence, cooking with gas. Okay, let's take one more minute. Everybody got a value proposition? Even if it's crude, can be crude, very mechanical right now. Yes? I'm seeing no nodding heads, which tells me you do not have. Okay, boom, 2, got it. Okay, now, so you've got a value proposition. Okay. All right, now today, we're not going to walk through the key messaging, but I want to talk a little bit about it because I want to save our final 15 minutes to talk. When you have these attributes, this reason to believe, and this value proposition, what would be sort of 3 key messages you would want to tell to sort of shore that up, right? To provide a little more information now. You know, Simon Sinek has this thing, start with why. It's a pretty good framework if you want to look it up. But again, if you were to craft out 3 more key messages to help you tell this story, it could be the why of your work, the how of your work, and what your work actually is, right? So why do you do it? How do you do it differently from others? And what is it actually that you generate through that? It could be about features and benefits. A feature of my work is this. A benefit of my work is X, right? It could also be the things that you really think make your work different, right? And I always say this when I'm working with researchers and academics. Well, what are the differentiators? Well, we don't do anything different. We're not that different. We're not the best. I don't know. You know, but you got to step out a little bit and try to differentiate yourself and own your ideas. So think about, again, what would be some of those key messages that you would want to deliver on your brand. Finally, this gets us to the place that we want to talk. Here's my free item for you. This is free, no cost to you. I've made this for you. If you'd care to leave me a tip, I would appreciate it. Just kidding. This is a wireframe. Yes, I drew this in my hotel room for you. But this is how most wireframes begin. And why did I draw a wireframe? Because I think that this messaging architecture works best we can really understand how it might work by looking at its application in something like our own personal researcher website, okay? Now let me walk you through what I've done here. This is common practice. At the top of the page, this first box where you see some quotation marks, here's where you might have your brand idea. In the simplest terms, I create vaccine research to change lives, right? Some big idea, right at the top of the page, okay? That's going to hook people. They're going to say, oh, what? Vaccines? Let me find out a little bit more about vaccine research. We come down to the next item. Here we've got a little headshot of you, and we've got your value proposition, okay? So we move from the big idea, now we move down to your value proposition. What is the key idea of your work? Below that, we've got a series of proof points, right? So you've seen my big idea, you understand my value proposition, let me show you why I'm credible, okay? I've got some proof points here. So whatever those are, they could be statistics, numbers. I've published 7,000 articles. I am the #1 expert in X, whatever. You get them here. Now, here are 3 areas to focus on your work. Again, we talked about those key messages. So here, I like working in sets of 3. There's actually the American Society of Science Researchers, something. They have a great communication toolkit, and they encourage people to always create your 3 key ideas. And I was warmed by that because I'm always saying that. Think in 3s. So what are those 3 areas? So this might be where you can sort of list out your focus areas of your work. Now, you may treat this in any number of ways. These could be actual clinical trials or research things that you're doing. It could be how you work, why you work, what you work on. It could be any number of things. But again, we're giving those people 3 key areas where they can sort of start to look at things. When you see a box with an X, that's a photo. Now, I've highlighted in circles the conversions. We talked about what is it we want people to do when they interact with us. We need to make sure that we make those opportunities available for them on our personal websites, right? So do you want them to download something you've done? Do you want them to participate in some research? Do you want them to connect with you? Do you want them to email you, right? So make it clear what you want them to do and make it easy for them to do. Now, you can go out pretty much anywhere and for about 20 bucks, buy this template and plug in your information into it. Whether you use WordPress or any of the sort of services around creating websites, you could do this. I believe in you. I think you could actually do this. But beyond the idea of a website, I hope that you see here a sort of information architecture. And I think this same type of information architecture could be helpful for you as you think about funding applications, as you think about writing those letters for when you want to get a job or pursue an opportunity. It could help you with resumes and things like that. And again, always knowing your idea, always knowing the focus area that you want to be known for and you want to work on, understanding that now or over the next few weeks helps you then figure out, where do I need to be? Who do I need to be talking to then? If this is the area I want to be known for, maybe it makes sense to be on social media, targeting that user group and being a thought leader there and participating in the dialogue, right? Maybe it means seizing speaking opportunities. Maybe it means saying no to some of the research that you've been working on instead to now focus on the thing that you actually care the most about. Maybe you don't even want to do research at all and you want to change the world and you develop some kind of nonprofit and go to a developing country or someplace and actually tackle an issue. I don't know. But this sort of process of thinking around what it is you want to achieve, what you want to be known for, hopefully provides some instruction and focus for you that you can now act on. It may take time. These things aren't immediate, but over time, they can be hopefully very effective for you. Now, that's a lot. It took us a lot of time. Questions, thoughts, comments, things, anything?
Brand yourself,
yeah,
or do you brand your research program? Which to me, maybe they go together, but maybe they're different things.
Yeah.
And maybe it depends on the audience that I'm thinking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I think for the purposes here today, I guess the idea was to brand yourself a bit. But obviously, you have to recognize what it is you want. Like, what do you want? If research is the key to the thing that you want to do, then I think it makes sense to look at them together.
And then what about, sorry, to add another question, and maybe nobody else feels like that, but for me, this is something, you're kind of putting yourself out there. So it's you know, you're making yourself quite vulnerable in the sense that if you start having your own website and you're on social media currently, I have these accounts that I'm not really active, and that's one of the reasons I'm sort of like, well, it feels comfortable in your own research, you know, your team and your academic ivory tower, and maybe the collaborations you have and the field work you do. But then beyond that, and especially if it's about branding yourself rather than branding your work, I don't know. What are your experiences with researchers who have done that?
Well, I think about people who've been very effective. Like I think about the folks who are behind Foundry, and I think about Steve Morgan when he was working on pharmacare. You know, it was a risk for those people to step out and to seize media opportunities, to start to seize partnership opportunities. You're absolutely right. Yes, it does make you vulnerable. The question you have to ask is this necessary to the thing I want to achieve or change? And for those people, it was, right? There was a public health need. They had a workable solution. They had an appetite for change at government. And so in order to make those things happen, that's in the government and policy work usually referred to as the policy window. But I think it's true of almost any issue. In order to capitalize on making system change, in order to capitalize on making impact, they had to step out of their comfort zone, right? They had to take the knowledge that they had gained through the evidence-based research, but they had to translate that. And what that meant was I need to be able to talk about that work and the need for this work in multiple languages, meaning I need to be able to talk to policy, I need to be able to talk to the public, I need to be able to talk to families. They needed to seize on media opportunities and coverage, right? Because that was going to build momentum for support for the work. So, and you know, because of their efforts to do that, they were recognized as leaders within their field, and it opens up opportunities for more work, for more research, for more impact. So again, I can't answer your specific question because it's up to you. What do you want to do? What do you want to change? Some people, again, may not want to create a website. I totally get it. If nothing else, maybe you have clear ideas of your focus and how you might articulate that. But again, it's up to you and really what it is you want to achieve.
Fantastic presentation, a lot of tangible and concrete ideas. How do you ensure that you're the most authentic brand you can create, in the sense that I want people to notice my brand, but not notice I branded myself?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I've seen a couple of failures in that area, and I'm like, I don't want to be like that type of personality.
I mean, I think probably the best way of doing that in a very real way would be reaching out to people you trust and asking them to have a look at it, giving you feedback, right, on it. I mean, there is no real way for this. I believe in very authentic expressions of brand, and that's basically why we run a human-centered design process, which is, you know, again, we're trying to actually get real ideas from the people closest to us, instead of just sort of a lot of hot language, right? We like hot language too, but again, you know, I think building from the ground up, accessing the resources that you have available to you, people you trust, is a great place, right? Hey, I'm working on this. I'm trying to sort of articulate what I do. Could you give me a little feedback? Yeah.
What insight do you have between, you know, there might be my value proposition, my way of working, but my audience is used to hearing it some ways, and like you can get a, like, whether it's a talk that normally is all about, you know, PowerPoint with different setup, whether it's a paper, whether it's like a grant application, like there's very rigid structure, and there's what people expect. They fulfill those expectations, or it might turn you down, but it's not intrinsically what you feel like. How you work. How do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, I mean, this is a challenge for probably most of you in the sense that you probably are moving between very highly technical application of your work, right, within a certain jargon and all kinds of things that need to happen. So that's a very good question. In some ways, a response back to your question around what's our work, but then what am I known for around that work? And I think that's the opportunity you have. The work is the work, and you can always speak to the technical specificity of that work. But in terms of your brand identity and what you want to be known for, maybe you want to be known for as a great collaborator for that work. So, you know, you need to articulate that and show how that happens within your process. But I think, again, the notion of the personal brand versus the research brand is a challenging one. And again, it comes from ultimately setting a goal for yourself and your work and making sure that your actions focus around that goal, right? So what would you want to be known for? If you want to be known for the technical excellence of your work, then you speak very technically. You look very technical. You are always driving home that message, right? Data, all the kind of hard facts around that. I'm not saying you always have to be like the soft, touchy-feely kind of thing either, right? But again, it's hopefully it emerges from that goal you set for yourself. What would you want to be known as? What would you want people to say about you, right? Does that help? I mean, it sounds simple. It's harder to do, but I think really that's why it's important to get that idea of your work and hold it. And always ask yourself, if I do this, is it speaking to that? If not, maybe I shouldn't do it, right? Maybe I should say no and look for another opportunity that's actually around my focus area. Somebody else? Other? Yep.
I would argue that we always do put ourselves out there. You know? At least that's basic fact. You need to recruit the best talent if you want to be able to have your lab run properly. So in fact, I wrote my thing all around how to convince the postdoc. So that's the graduate student that now we won't know as much, but somebody who actually wants a career in science, what would they talk to me and not someone else? And kind of, I mean, it's funny that I never actually did this work before, but it's kind of required if you want to sell your lab in a way that's honest, yet, you know, will establish why somebody who wants a career in science should come to me, you know, and not someone else. You know. It's actually excellent work, and I still haven't resolved all the questions forward, but it definitely needs to be done in a way. Make sure that you tell yourself what you are really, and also make it clear that you have the goal that you want to achieve.
Yeah, I'm an academic at heart too, right? So I, again, recoil from the notion of selling things, right? But the reality is, we do need to do that from time to time, and we can find we can make peace with that process. We can do it in an honest and authentic way.
Selling is maybe not the right word. How are you going to make their career better too? How can you help them achieve their goals?
Yeah.
Because they can use what information, whatever skills you achieve or accomplish that will help them move forward. But for that, you need to know what you will offer.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a joke. One of the bad jokes in here. Here are my details. I would be happy to answer questions or connect with you in any space. I do actually use email a lot. I am on LinkedIn. It's one weird place that I actually from time to time participate. And then I post photographs on Instagram. Your social media question, again, social media can be very effective for you based around conversation or the groups that you want to participate in and where you want to have influence. Twitter was really great for me when I was working on documentary projects. I followed lots of documentary folks. I was followed in turn by those people, and it was a way in which to get a lot of information. It's like a stream of customized, tailored information if you focus it. If you follow comedians and Ivory Soap and all kinds of people, it starts to become a bit of a useless entity. But if you actually create Twitter or use Twitter in such a way to focus on a specific subject area, it can be very useful. And I find I worked on a group, Social Media and Health in the early days, which was a bit of a sort of community group that started up in Vancouver. And I think we ran that for about 4 years. We had people talking and things like that, and it was really great. It was a fun thing at the time. Yeah. So these are my details. I encourage you to contact me. There's a guy who is an architect in the South where I'm from who did a lot of interesting avant-garde architectural pieces based around real community needs in the rural South. And he had a saying which was, proceed and be bold. And I think it is the best thing I can say to you when you're thinking about your personal brand. I think it is to be bold, to own ideas. This is what I often say. There's an idea that we want to own. What is that idea? How would we own it? How would we be the authority or the expert on that idea? How can we help people understand that idea? So if there's any further questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. I have cards if you want them. There is an evaluation of this session. I take evaluation very seriously, so I would hope that you will all go to this and give me feedback. You can use a QR code if you're living in 2010. That's one of my jokes. And there's also page 41 of the syllabus. Thanks, everyone. That was unnecessary, but thank you.